Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Joe Davidge. I'm the director of the Georgia Center for the Book. And on behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book, the South Carolina Center for the Book, Read South Carolina, welcome to our first On My Mind program. On My Mind, of course, is a new reading series that the Georgia Center for the Book and the South Carolina Center for the Book developed during this pandemic. It's a series that we created to celebrate books, authors, and publishers from both sides of our border. So in the coming months, we will host more events like this one that celebrate authors from Georgia, from South Carolina, books about South Carolina, books about Georgia. And, we hope that they are from publishers like tonight's Hub City Press, the University of South Carolina Press, and the University of Georgia Press. We hope you enjoy this program and you'll join us for many more in the future. And we hope to continue this year-round for many years to come. I'd also like to thank the DeKalb Library Foundation. They, of course, are the fundraising arm for our library system here in DeKalb County that pay for things like the Zoom count that we're coming to you live tonight. It also pays for things like 1,000 books before kindergarten and a wonderful program that we have here in our library system called Take the Internet Home that provides Verizon jetpacks for individuals to check out for up to a month so that they can surf the net, look for a job, apply for a job, or maybe get that assistance that they're needing. So thank you to the DeKalb Library Foundation for all the extra assistance they provide our library system. So just a few things before we start tonight. If you have a question and you'd like to ask it after our presenters finish up, go ahead and you can type it either in the Q&A section or in the chat section, and I will read those aloud to our presenters when that portion arises. Also, we will put a link in the chat where you can order tonight's book. Don't forget, we're a little ahead of the game. It is October 1st today, but this book officially publishes on October 6th. But I can tell you that the excitement is already building. It's got wonderful reviews from Kirkus and Publishers Weekly, and it is in the new and noteworthy section of the New York Times this coming week. So if you all are thinking about purchasing this book, or you maybe want to get another look at it before you do that, you can pick up a copy of the New York Times this week and see the praise for the wonderful work that these 21 authors have done this evening. So we're going to start with, of course, the editor, Cinelle Barnes, and then we'll have our other two presenters, Aruni Kashyap and Gary Johnson, read after her. And then we can feel free to ask them as many questions as possible, ask all three of them a question, or individually, however you all would like to do that. So right now, I'd like to start off by talking about Cinelle Barnes, who is an essayist, memoirist, educator, and also a candle maker with a bachelor's in the arts degree in media studies and journalism from Hunter College. She, of course, has always loved books and had a very tumultuous childhood growing up in the Philippines, and then, of course, lived as an undocumented immigrant in New York City. Right now, she is going to be reading her work for Charleston, South Carolina, where, like many of us, are in our homes, in our home offices. She has a soccer game going on. I have a rooster crowing, but we're going to try and get past all of that and delve into these wonderful essays about places in the American South and culture and cultural transportation of the South, and where people feel that they fit in and where they don't fit in, and where some of our cultural touchstones come from, and where we find those cultural touchstones when we're taken out of our element and put somewhere else. So we are so pleased tonight to present Hub City Press's A Measure of Belonging, 21 Writers of Color on the New American South. Cinelle?
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and celebrating this anthology with us. We've been working really hard to bring this all together for you. It's not easy bringing 21 voices together, but it's definitely harder to not bring them forward and have them read to you and write for you and write to you. And so it's definitely my honor to just share the space on the page and right now on Zoom with 21 writers, specifically tonight, Gary and Aruni. I wanted to read a little bit from the introduction to tonight And this kind of explains how this book came about, where the idea came from, and you'll learn that this was really 10 years in the making for me. So this is from the introduction of A Measure of Belonging, 21 Writers of Color on the New American South. So, how do you like it here? She said. I told her that I loved the weather, the beaches, and historic downtown. But the part of me that had pursued a degree in journalism and literature and was determined to practice what I was taught told her the whole truth. Remembering how insular the city felt and how stuck out without having to try, I said. But there are definitely things I would change. Honey, nobody asked you to move here, the woman said. And that was all. She finished her meal, pushed her chair back, slapped her cloth napkin on the table, left, and never spoke to me again in the years that her husband shared a place of work. It was not that I wanted or needed to be asked to come somewhere or be a part of something. It was that I was told, to my face, at a welcome dinner, by someone who could have been more than a stranger, that I was not, in fact, invited. The dismissal I felt that night would be felt again throughout the decade I've spent in the South. In these 10 years, I have had interactions, been privy to conversations, and encountered institutions, tangible and not, that could have led me to believe what my former employers, friends, relatives, teachers, and mentors told me way back when. There is nothing for you there. You're going to turn right back around. I haven't turned back around. Instead, I've committed myself to making this place as big as it actually is. Because small is so 10 years ago. Small is that woman who called me honey. Small is a South that saves its best smiles, best hay-alls, and best resources to perpetuate a cultural homogeneity. And small are the books about this region that refuse to acknowledge and celebrate the voices and narratives of honey me, honey she, honey he, honey they, and honey you. And no, there is not nothing for me here. And there is not nothing for other people of color. There is not nothing for readers like you. There is this book, this anthology. There are the established and emerging writers herein who not only have, but share. While their stories and styles differ, perhaps more so than even I anticipated, the truth they share is that, like most in their generation, they never bought into the lie that they did not belong here. These essays know how to take up space and make space. This is a collection of stories that say, honey, you come right here and sit up next to me. In Minda Honey's essay, she asks us to sit right up next to her on a stoop and listen to tales of generational hurt and hope. Andrew Carnegie medalist K.Z. Lehman invites us to step into a recording studio and the mind of a Black man in Mississippi. Christina Cleveland asks us to hear conversations in academia and on Southeastern college sports. Joy Priest swings open her car door, takes us for a ride in her Cuddy, turns up the volume on her radio, and makes us feel all the times she's felt young and all the times she's felt so old. Here is here. And that woman said that nobody asked me to come here. I decided that every one of my projects thereafter would be an invitation for other people of color to come, to be visible, and to thrive here. Each one of these essays, then, is an invitation to step into power and to empower. An RSVP to, honey, I invite you to be here and tell me your story. My hope is that reading this book will activate you to make similar definitive choices, wherever and whoever you are, so that, as Tony Jensen writes, this place would be a we rather than an it, that we all might feel a measure of belonging. Without further ado, I invite Gary Jackson to read to us.
Hey. How is everybody? You can't answer me, so that's okay. But I want to thank Cinelle for putting this together, along with Joe and Allie for putting together this reading and having us all come out. I'm going to read my essay that is in the book that I actually have a copy. I was told that I am, I think, maybe the only person in this group who has a copy. As Joe said, it doesn't actually come out until October 6th. I literally got this about 30 minutes ago, so it's hot off the press. I was gonna think of a clever way to maybe cut some of my essay out and leave you wanting more, but blame it on the poet in me. This is actually a very short essay, so I'm just gonna read the whole thing. It's about my time living in Charleston, South Carolina, and the name of this essay is called Ain't Misbehaving. We walked down King Street, the main downtown strip in Charleston, South Carolina, which is central to everything. The college bars, the cheap eats, the tourist spots, the historic city market, the Battery, Louis Vuitton, everything. I was treating my mom and stepdad, both of whom had helped my wife and I drive a U-Haul from Albuquerque to Charleston. But having only lived in the city for 3 days, I was still more tourist than native, and in fact would never be native, according to Charleston standards. I was not from Charleston, nor my family, or family's family. No surprise then that the three of us would stumble into Juanita Greenberg's Nacho Royale, lured by the promise of cheap tacos and even cheaper cold beer. It was late July and we were dying to get out of the sweltering heat, so different from the high desert nights I was used to in New Mexico, when even in the summer after the sun went down, you could cool off by a good 10 degrees. Inside, we took note of the wait staff, a collection of smiling young white women and men, and we compared them to what we glimpsed of the cooks in the kitchen, all of whom were Black and looking steadily down at the grill. Huh, my mother said, already working out a thesis. The food took so long they comped us a meal. Whether it was a good or a bad omen, we couldn't decide. After dinner, we opted to walk around a little more and have another drink somewhere before going home. My stepdad took note of all the bicycles hitched to light posts and scattered bike racks down side streets and near shop fronts, every one of them secured with a student-priced $20 chain. Niggas would have stole all these bikes back home, my stepdad said. Shit, I would clean up down here. My mother laughed in agreement, but told him to be quiet since we were walking in public and white folks were thick out tonight, as they are most nights on King Street. Of the few Black folks we saw, most of them were working in a kitchen or behind a counter. I drove around for a while, partly because I didn't know how to hook back onto I-26 to get back home, and partly because I wanted to prove my folks wrong. Charleston was just as Black as Dallas, Texas. Not that far north on King Street, near the I-26 entrance ramp, we drove by an apartment complex where a barbecue was in full swing. We saw 30 to 40 Black folks chatting and lounging and kids popping wheelies on bikes. We smelled grilled and smoked meat. There they are, my stepdad smiled. You can drop me off here. My mother is an expert at making snap decisions based off relatively limited information that usually work out for the best. See Exhibit A, my father. So I was fully prepared when she later confessed she felt something was off downtown. They well behave down here, she said, meaning the South, meaning she couldn't understand how people could just walk under the Confederate flag shadow on the state grounds or walk by statues erected to honor pro-slavery secessionists on their way to school. I argued that just because we weren't stealing every unattended bike in Charleston didn't necessarily mean anything either. Being well-behaved wasn't a sign of subservience, but I could see how the idea of the well-behaved Black man could be used against someone, against me. I'm gonna fast forward a little bit. It's no secret that my voice carries. My wife and I jokingly call this Black man's voice and joke about how long it took her to get used to it, the same voice I've used all my life. If my mother and I are in the same room, we do in fact sometimes shout at each other so we can continue the conversation while one of us goes into another room to fix something to eat use the bathroom, turn on the TV. While standing in line to vote in the 2018 midterm election, I heard my name called out from someone standing about 12 people ahead of us in line. A coworker had picked me out after hearing me speak in what I thought was a low tone to my wife. People on the first floor of the English department can hear my conferences with students, even though my office is on the fourth floor. So I'm not surprised when I startle students, when I call everyone's attention, when I tell a student this will be on the test, when I laugh out loud, when I yell hello from across campus. Once, a white male student accused me of always yelling, of always being angry. He even wrote in a midterm response paper that was supposed to focus on poetic form that he thought I had a darkness inside of me. I responded with concern for his well-being, as we are trained to do as professors who teach students who may be going through myriad issues in school or back home. But I was not about to explain or defend my own literal voice. Later, that same student submitted a poem for a workshop in which he described a poetry class murdering their poetry professor and then celebrating. And did I modulate my voice, try to consciously lower the register to hit right below that indecipherable decibel that made only white people uncomfortable but no one else? Of course I did. Look up the definition of well-behaved, and there's a picture of an assistant professor trying to make tenure. Though I denied the student an apology, I thought back to what my mother said after only being in Charleston for 3 days. They're well-behaved down here. There are plenty of spaces where I'm hyper aware that I'm being watched and assessed, where I'm being viewed as an ambassador to Blackness, and someone says something that makes me want to bare my teeth, and I have to decide how to respond. What do you do after a white man calls you Darius Brucker yet again in a bar, then laughs, tells you when you do not immediately smile or laugh, it's a compliment, you know? After a poetry reading, a well-meaning white woman told me, "It can't be that bad, can it?" I told her it was. "Maybe in Kansas," she said, referencing one of my poems that I just read. "But here, people don't act like that anymore." I told her that I lived here too, meaning Charleston, and also the world. But she was already off and talking about something else, once again reminding me that I was not from here and not part of her world, or more accurately, my world was not considered valid. Just the other day, a Black man held the door open for me and my friends, the woman said. I almost told her that Black man probably hated her guts, and that being polite did not equal forgiveness or grace. Maybe I should have said more, should have tried to explain. Instead, I simply finished my drink, thanked the organizers for putting the reading and reception together, and politely left. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next reader, Aruni Kashyap. You're up.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you so much. It was lovely to hear the essay in your voice, which I just finished reading this evening. Thank you so much for really doing that. My essay is titled, "Are You Muslim and Other Questions White Landlords Ask Me." I'm a recent, actually, transplant to Georgia. I grew up in India, lived most of my life in India, and I moved to Georgia in 2018. This is an episode that I'm recounting from one of the many strange, funny, and sometimes threatening, sometimes worrying incidents that I faced while house hunting in Georgia. I'm on my way to look for a new living space that I need starting this summer. It has been hard to looking for a place. The leasing cycle in this city works like a semester system. Just like how you can't enroll in a course in the middle of a semester, it is next to impossible to find an apartment in a preferred location during what they call off-season. I have been living in Athens, Georgia for 1.5 years, but this is the first time I'm looking for a house on my own. When I first moved here, it was December and everyone was busy enjoying the holidays. The streets were deserted and the town felt lonely. A generous colleague drove me around the deserted city looking for apartments. He was a tall man in a black jacket. It was hard not to like him because he addressed everyone as ma'am and sir, because he always smiled while talking, and because he listened to people with the patience of a therapist. Feeling reassured and slightly jet lagged, I let him handle most of the conversations with leasing agents, landlords, and receptionists at rental agencies. I was grateful that it wasn't too cold in Georgia. When a leasing officer said that she couldn't rent it to me because I didn't have a credit history in the country, it was my colleague who stepped ahead to speak on my behalf, presenting a request she couldn't walk away from. Ma'am, if you don't mind, can you please explain the situation to you? First, he thanked her for being patient with us, thanked her for running my credit history, and then explained to her the funny problem of not having a credit history because I had just immigrated to this country a week ago. He is going to have a credit history and you wouldn't have any problem with him as your tenant. He looked at me and suggested, maybe you can show them your contract with the university. Last week, I made 30 phone calls and viewed 7 possible places to rent. Since it is the off season, my options are limited. When a colleague tells me about a home that would suit my needs, 2 bedrooms, around $1,200, not far from downtown Athens, I look it up immediately. The house is a little over my budget, but I have told myself that if I love something, I will take it. If I can imagine myself doing housework in my underwear, I would rent it. The house has a sunroom, 2 bedrooms, and 2 bathrooms. I love the sunroom. I would like to sit and read with a cup of hard-boiled cardamom tea and my henna hair mask and a sandalwood face pack on. There is a clean backyard with a dead tree and a storage room. My mother would have disapproved of this dead tree. You need things that are alive and growing around you, not a tall, dead tree. But there is something beautiful about this tree, with its branches outstretched to the skies as if begging for rains. The local bookshop, my favorite one, is in the vicinity. I attend many events there. Good cafes that sell turmeric tea are less than a mile away. There's also an excellent vegan restaurant, though I'm a proud omnivore. And just to be clear, I don't drink turmeric tea. What I mean is that this is the cool part of the town. Most of my colleagues and students think so. I'm often told this is the liberal part of Athens. When I drive through the neighborhood, I see so many blue-colored Stacey Abrams for governor signs in front of pretty little houses. The yard is lined with shrubs and plants. The neighborhood is quiet. I take out my phone and note down things: rent, power, gas, square feet, rental insurance, maintenance. I like what I'm seeing, and as we move from room to room, I fall in love with the house. Maybe you can sit down on a Sunday with a book here, the lady says, standing in the sunroom. In reply, I smile and nod my head. I like that she suggests the idea of reading a book. The husband, who is wearing a white polo shirt, assures me that I can call him to take care of anything. Any maintenance issue, he says, you can call me anytime. The rooms aren't massive, but they aren't small. I imagine placing my queen bed in the bedroom. I'm sure I would be able to fit in a dresser and a couple of bookcases. I have a lot of books. I keep books even in my bedroom, on my bed's headstand, on the bedside table. I'm always buying bookshelves. You ask about natural light. The woman steps into one of the bedrooms and pulls the blinds. You'll get ample natural light. The second bedroom receives the afternoon's light, you know. I like the couple most when they tell me that they attend events at my favorite bookshop, and when they name professors who work at my university asking me if I know them. I tell them that my university is huge and there are thousands of professors. They nod in agreement. They say that the university is huge and that you could work there for decades without knowing most people. I nod back. We have a bond. I decide to rent the house. I tell them that I love what I have seen, but hold off on telling them about my decision because I have another home to view that day. The husband and wife look like people who would vote for Stacey Abrams. I like them. They are chatty and warm, and they bitch about rental companies that prey on young students who come to our country for education, and we treat them like shit by exploiting them. But it is a small question from a lady that ticks me off. So I was wondering, are you a Muslim? Later, a friend of mine would tell me that it is illegal to ask questions about my religion. Another friend would be furious to hear this, but I laugh about it. When a couple asks me if I'm a Muslim, I'm just exhausted. Perhaps I don't want to accept that these people who are funny and chatty and sensitive about immigrant students, who are astonished that I am a professor, oh wow, you must be so intelligent that they hired you from India, are just like everybody else. I have heard variations of their question from landlords, colleagues, and other departments, and cab drivers. I'm actually born Hindu, though I don't care much about my religion. I'm not an atheist. I eat beef. I have Saraswati statues in my house because Saraswati is a goddess of learning, like Minerva, and I never pray to her. I have her statues because she is a stunning goddess who refused to marry, and she traveled on the back of a giant swan with a black bindi on her forehead and a red lotus in one of her hands. Is this the answer the couple was looking for? Are you a Muslim? I look around for a chair to sit, but we are outside the house now in the front yard. I'm about to leave. It is almost noon and there is a lot more to do so, such as view another house, buy groceries, and search websites for apartments. And I feel like taking a nap. I just want to go home and lie in my bed and stare at the white ceiling. I say, excuse me? I think about the several places I have viewed, good areas where good white people live with other non-white people from around the world, people who would probably vote for Stacey Abrams again. I think about the apartment on Deering Street that I found on Facebook. After viewing the apartment rented by a young lady, we talked about the huge sectional that she had bought from a store called Anthropology. She said she had only received 2 queries, including one from me. She was in a hurry to get out of her lease. The other query was from a young freshman who couldn't move in until August. I said, that is a great fit for me. I said that I would conform after an hour once I viewed the apartment on Prince Avenue, another cool part of the town. When I texted her later that day, I thought about the adequate natural light the house received and where I would place my writing desk. I was sure my house hunting was over. To my surprise, I received a text. Sorry, the other girl applied and got approved. Last week, I also looked at a townhome on South Millage Avenue, next to my favorite Chinese restaurant. The townhome was available in summer, was just the size I needed it to be and the right price. I told the manager that I liked the townhome and would rent it. He promised to email me a lease. I stopped looking for houses, relieved that my house hunting was finally over. When the lease didn't reach me, I gave him a few days and then sent a message. I emailed him after 6 days, left a voicemail after 10, called and texted again after 2 weeks, no response. I had started to feel like a stalker. In the meantime, the other houses I could have rented were snatched away. Last week, I also visited an apartment in a filthy neighborhood where the grass was tall and bugs, fine like pollen, entered my nose, making me sneeze as I walked towards the door. Inside, a young man, perhaps in his late 20s, greeted me. The apartment smelled. A beagle growled at me from a cage, and a gun was on the dining table as if it were home decor. I don't want to look for apartments anymore, and that's why I feel like resting on a bed for several hours. That's why I say, excuse me? Actually, I know what to tell them to get this house. I could say to them, no, I'm not a Muslim. And they would laugh, and I would laugh awkwardly, and I would get the house. After all, unlike the landlord of the house on Carlton Street, as if to test my knowledge when they hear what I do for a living, they haven't asked me, who is your favorite American author? At least, like the landlord of the 2-bedroom apartment in Boulevard, they aren't asking, can you also teach Shakespeare? Do you know do you know where to be or not to be is from? Ha ha ha. They haven't asked me with lifted eyebrows like that landlord who told me about his guru in Delhi and asked, you teach the English language? And when I answered, no, I teach English literature, he asked me again, I mean, do you also teach American kids? Yes, I replied after a pause. He showed me 2 horrible houses. One landlord went on to quiz me further about my responsibilities. Was I a professor who also taught a graduate student or just undergrads who needs ESL help? This constant questioning is so wearing. I can say that I'm a Hindu and solve this problem, but I do not. I could use my Hindu privilege to get this house because it is so tempting because I'm exhausted. But I'm not sure if I would be able to sleep well in this house if I do. I want to say, I'm sorry, ma'am. How is that question relevant? I'm a writer and a teacher. That's all matters. That's all that matters. Instead, I say, I'm not comfortable answering the question. I'm not sure why am I so polite. After a pause, the husband laughs loudly, too loudly, in fact, too cheerfully. It is the kind of awkward laughter that acknowledges guilt but tries to laugh it away. Oh, that doesn't matter, he says. Flustered, the lady tells me, but you ask so much about the sun. If this house will get enough natural light? So we thought, I wanted to ask them back, don't white people like natural light in their houses? But I don't. I smile, I laugh at their jokes, I exit politely, promising to get back to them, though of course, I won't. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to read. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Cinelle. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Aruni. That was absolutely wonderful. Don't forget, if you would like to ask any of our panelists a question, go ahead and type it into the Q&A section or into the chat now, and we will get that rolling. You know, I have to say, those are all absolutely brilliant and amazing pieces that kind of, you know, shine the light on places and situations in the American South that, you know, I know many of us don't deal with on a daily basis, and, you know, don't have to think about on a daily basis. So, you know, it's good to have that brought to our attention and to have that dialogue about it. Cinelle, what was it like getting all of these together? You know, I mean, they're very soul bearing and had to, you know, maybe even wear on you at times when you were reading through all of this. But how did you actually select just 21 out of all of them? And you know, were there darlings that you had to kill amongst them?
Yeah, the funny thing is the original title was actually A Measure of Belonging, 20 Writers on the New American South. And before that, it was just The American South. And there was just a lot of back and forth on who could do it and when deadlines were, and you know, who had the bandwidth to do it, and who could, you know, deliver it by a certain time. And clearly, this is not representative of all the writers of color in the South. And even, you know, even I cringe just a little bit even when I read that part of the title, because there's so much to unpack there, and it's representative of a whole, and yet it's not. And I guess to answer the question, how did we put this together? I just contacted people that I love, that I know, whose work I read, whose work my husband reads, whose work, you know, my publisher reads, or friends from workshops read. There was, you know, like I was saying, the original title was 20 Writers. And the 21st came at the 11th hour. We were about to send it to copy editing. And a friend of mine that I had gone to Voices of the Nation's Arts with, which is a workshop just for writers of color, you know, she held a workshop about maybe a year or so ago. And she knew that I was editing this anthology, and she said, do you still have room? There's this person that you really just need to read. Please just read it. I'm not even asking for you to publish it. Please just read it. And at the time, you know, we had started to arrange the essays one after the other. in whatever order it felt natural to arrange them. And I read this, and it was actually Gum by Diana Sehas, which became the end of the book. And it was, it ended on this you know, like we talk about moments. I remember there's a edition of Best American Essays. I think it was Cheryl Strayed who edited it a couple years ago. And when she was asked this question, how did you select these writers? She said, every one of these made me say, but like in a different way, like different pronunciation, different diction, different accent, different, you know, some of them were like, and some of them were like, and some of them were like, you know, like, and every single one of these kind of made me do that either at the end or in the middle of, or at the beginning. And really that's what it was. It was people that I loved, works that I loved, people that I loved, also loved. And my hope is that, you know, this is really just an intro to an intro to an intro. Clearly this is not all of us, right? But sadly, this might be the most that someone might read of writers of color at once. So.
Thank you, Sanel, for that. So let me look and see what we have so far. We have a question from Lindsay. She's like, it's so interesting that all three are newcomers to the region and all are vivid voices. Thank you, Lindsay. And she asks, are others native to the Southeast? So, you know, I know in when we were looking at putting this reading together, you know, Sonia Kamal is in there, Davy Lascar is in there. She's on the West Coast now, but she was here in Atlanta for a while. I think there were 6 or 8 that we were actually thinking of trying to do in a large reading that's were either Georgia based or South Carolina based. But how far does, you know, it extend out, Sanel, as far as regionality with the essays?
I think down Florida, Texas, up toward Arkansas, I think is the border. And then, do we have a West Virginia? I can't. No West Virginia, but I think definitely North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, mentions of Alabama, Tennessee, Florida, Texas, yeah, Arizona, but and Arkansas. I would say that more than a third, if not nearly half, of contributors were born and raised in the South. Some have left and have not come back. Some are coming back, and that was kind of the impetus for the essays that they contributed. Kind of like Tiana Clark's essay about Tennessee.
Got it. Well, speaking of Davy real quick, and then moving over to Gary for a second, you know, because Davy was a poet and then wrote that wonderful novel, The Atlas of Reds and Blues, that was very poetic and also about, you know, otherness and being confined and trapped in a space and sort of like watching the world go on around you. But I have to say, and I've heard Gary read before, but you can clearly hear, you not only read like a poet would take the full 15 minutes, but you know, it look up well behaved in a dictionary and you find a picture of a professor hoping to make I was like, that was, you can hear the poetry in it. You can just hear it. And you know, when I was reading Davy's book as well, you know, it seems you never lose the poet's voice. I think poets also have a certain eye and way of looking at the world. So what's it like taking, you know, that sort of poetic eye and using it, you know, in nonfiction and in essay form?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And thanks for liking that line. That was my kind of chuckle gut punch line I like to do. Yeah, you know, the funny thing is that after I wrote this essay for, you know, after Cinelle hit me up, which I have to thank you again, Cinelle, for just inviting me to contribute and be part of this collection. But once I wrote that essay, I actually went back and wrote a poem about that last moment, that last scene that was about the woman who approached me after a poetry reading and asked me about, you know, it can't be that bad. So I feel like I'm so used to like working with this very kind of economic use of language. And the challenge for me is actually saying more about something because I'm so used to writing poetry. And I think that kind of comes out in my essays in the sense that like I'm trying to like hit kind of these what I think are pretty impactful moments and figure out a way to kind of bridge them together. And I hope that it creates a narrative of some sort. But that same kind of use of associative leaps, which I'm used to doing in my poetry, seems to translate in the little bit of nonfiction I've written. And I can also say that most of my nonfiction or prose is focusing on things that I'm also trying to pursue in my poetry. And so it almost becomes this race where there's two parts of my brain trying to figure out like, what's it gonna be? Is it gonna be a poem first, or is it gonna be an essay? Or right now I'm working on like really short prose pieces that also are kind of poems in another form. So I find myself kind of playing that game a lot in my head. I don't know if that answers your question really, Joe, but yeah. And I like writing prose just because it gives me a break from poetry. Poets will probably, you know, get mad at me for saying that, but sometimes I need a fucking break, man. And prose kind of frees me up a little bit, even if I'm writing about the same subjects.
Got it. Well, we have a few questions. Anderson from the South Carolina Center for the Book. She is actually she's on a participant view and not in a presenter view this evening. But we have a few questions from Anderson this evening. So let's do this one first. And maybe we'll start with Aruni, since I haven't got to you yet. But why is it important for you to contribute to this anthology?
You want me to answer that, Joe?
Please.
Okay, thank you, Joe, for asking me that question. And Anderson, thank you for the question. When I got a request to contribute to this anthology, I was new. I'm still very new because I moved to United States in 2018. So I'm absolutely new in this country. It was a huge decision for me to sort of leave my life, pack my life into 36 boxes and move to the South, a place I have never lived here, never been to. You know, I only knew about Atlanta. And whatever I knew about the South was through the novels set in the South, the great novels, the great Southern novels. And I read them as American literature. So when Cinelle asked me to contribute, I felt that this was my way of meditating about my belonging here, because I think you're critical about the places that you love. And I have come here and I have made good friends. I have met lovely people. I have good colleagues and good friends here. And actually I love being here and I love Athens. So when I had those experiences, I was disappointed and I wanted, as a person living here, to talk about it so that nobody gets asked that question again. So it was important for me to write for this anthology, to meditate on my belonging in this, in the South, how I belong here, where I fit in, but at the same time provide feedback on how the South can be better. Because I love the South, because I love Athens, because I love the Chinese restaurant, because I love that bookstore, because I love my job, because I love the university. And I think the greatest patriots of any country, any location, are the greatest critiques. So that's what I'm doing. I'm actually critiquing from a place of satisfaction and not only disappointment. Satisfaction and delight and disappointment. It's a mixture of that.
Mm, mm. Thank you, Aruni. Gary, do you want to go ahead and take that one as well?
Yeah. Can you repeat? Was the question basically just like, why do I feel like it's important to contribute? Sorry.
Yeah, why was it important for you to contribute to this anthology?
Yeah. And I really like what you said, Aruni, of the kind of, it comes from a place that's also about satisfaction and joy as much as criticism, and how to look at something and say this could be better. And similar to that, I feel like I shouldn't say we, but I don't write enough about place and landscape, even though I really like it when I do. And it takes years, partially because I'm a slow writer, but it takes years for a landscape to really kind of work on me to the point where I start writing about it. And when Cinelle came to me with this request, I really appreciated it because it kind of lit a fire under me and kind of forced me to sit down and really interrogate, like, how well do I fit in this place? And that's not even the right word. Maybe it's more, how visible am I here and how invisible am I here? And there are days where I feel both simultaneously. And knowing that, I still don't write about it as much as I probably should. And maybe that's just because there's other things I'm trying to pursue. But I feel like region is so important to who we are and how we kind of view this world. And like, this is the longest I've ever lived in a place outside of my hometown, which is Topeka, Kansas. So even that is kind of odd to think about. Like, my wife and I actually feel weird that South Carolina is like the second longest place we've been at outside of, where we grew up. And so I don't know, I think it's important to be able to write about how much a place affects you, especially if you're not a person who's considered representative, which I know is something Cinelle talked about in her introduction and in the earlier question. And I feel like, especially in the South, I'm glad that there are like native Southerners who are in the collection, but I'm also glad there are people who are like transplants, because I feel like that's just as valid and as important, to not only to how people feel like growing up here, but how do people feel when they come here and try to make a home, and how welcomed or unwelcome do they feel, and just all those things. And clearly we like it here, or we wouldn't be here this long. So, the palmetto bugs drive me crazy, but otherwise.
Oh, palmetto bugs. I remember when I moved to Atlanta and I actually thought that was a separate kind of bug and not just a fancy name for a cockroach. And then I realized that was just the polite way of saying it. And the landlord of the place that I was originally living, it was very interesting. I grew up in West Virginia, which is kind of the South, but I was on the northern, tip of West Virginia, closer to the Pennsylvania border. And, you don't have squirrels the size that they have squirrels down here. I mean, squirrels are the size of chihuahuas in Atlanta. The palmetto bugs that I didn't understand. And then for some strange reason, I had snails with shells just like appearing in all the plants I had on my porch. And like, if I get 4 more of these things, it's like biblical plagues. What is going on with the South? And in a very sweet, aspirated Atlanta accent, she's like, "Oh, sweetie, where are you from?" And it's like, "Oh, yes, I've arrived smack dab in the South. It's smack dab in the South." So now I know you've kind of maybe answered that question about putting it together, but why was it important for you to do this particular book? Barring the this particular book at this time, because I think we're living in very extraordinary times right now where everything is just on the front burner and you know, on a very high simmer or on a full boil. But you know, why is it very? You know, I think it's important that this book is out there, but you know, why for you is it important to have this out there?
I feel like if you ask me that on Tuesday, I'll have a different answer. Today, it's a different answer, but every one of them is true. But one of the first things that comes to mind is kind of like Gary. I think we moved here around the same time. And yeah, that's a long time. That's like, I've lived in the United States for nearly 20 years, half of it here in the South. And I still every day ask myself if I'm a Southerner. And my daughter was born here. My husband is from here. My husband tried to leave this place, and the recession brought us back. And so to me, you know, that's a decade of memories. It's a decade of forming yet another part of my identity or another layer of it. And I know that, you know, I knew that I wasn't alone in that. And I knew that too, when I moved here, kind of like I say in the introduction, my writing mentors and my employers up in New York were like, why are you moving down there? You know, you want to get published, you got to stay in New York. And you want to do this, you got to stay in New York. And I remember thinking, well, that's sad, you know, because that's so limiting for so many of us, and not all of us can be in New York, especially during a recession, especially after yet another recession and yet another recession. And now there's a pandemic, you know. And I remember thinking, no, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to go down south and do it. And I'm going to show you that here I am in the throes of early motherhood with postpartum depression, rocking a baby to sleep, writing on the armrest of the rocking chair, that I can do it. And I did it. And that comes partly from, I just have that spirit in me, but I'm also very type A. And I thought, you know, I can use that same spirit, and I can use my regimented like way of living and doing things to serve others. One of the best things I ever read was from Toni Morrison. And I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but she said, you know, once you get these jobs that you've so brilliantly trained for, ... remember this is not a grab bag candy game. And I have always taken that to heart. I've always, you know, thought, I did it. I came down here writing on an index card on the armrest of a rocking chair, or talking into my phone, writing 2 books like that, you know, over the course of 6, 7, 8 years. And that's it. That's what she was talking about. Like, here I am. What can I do? And I always thought to, you know, not just my personal history, but my cultural history, being Filipino, you know, growing up in the Pacific, you're Asian, but you're Southeast Asian, but you also have a Latino last name, and you're also a former colony of the United States. And a big part of your family is in California and New York, and also in Australia. You know, there's so much about being Filipino that either makes us aspire to whiteness and support whiteness, or makes us decide to unhook from it and empower others, and, you know, not live on a scarcity mindset. And to me, making decisions like this, kind of like I talk about in the introduction to the book, that I hope you make a definitive choice, or definitive choices, that to me is what I want my work to be about and my life to be about. And especially right now, I knew we had to get this book done, and it had to come out like by October 2020. Like I just was resolved, and I was going to do it. And, you know, if I have that ability, might as well do it for to give more than just myself. I'm also a reader. That's what's important, I think. I'm a reader, and this is a book I wish I had however many years ago. You know, being a young undocumented immigrant who was a cleaning lady. Like, this is the kind of book that I would have loved to scrounge all my coins together for and walk to the Strand bookstore for and picked up, you know, a used copy of. Like, and this is kind of what I want to give to readers, because I know readers want it.
Oh, amazing, amazing. So it's like a love letter to reading and readers. One, absolutely wonderful. So we have two more quick questions, and then I can release you all from author duties this evening. So Lindsay asked one, and she actually directs it for you, Cinelle, but you know, anyone can take this one as well because it's a wonderful question. It says, does being a transplant give you a different dimension in looking at Southern authors?
I wouldn't know that it's different. But I do know that it's true. The way I try to understand my husband's family is maybe the way I try to understand the rest of the South. I look at them lovingly and critically. I think too, I'm able to tell my husband things that his sisters would never be able to tell him. Not because they don't know, but because they can't. And he's able to tell me the same, you know. And the message just delivered in a different way. I think more logistically, I was able to, like in the editing process, for writers who are quote unquote homegrown, you know, sometimes they would get really lyrical. And I love, if you've read like my books, they're really lyrical and I love lyricism. And sometimes I would just be like, hey, that's the Southern lyricism that I think we've all learned to use as a mask, or that we've used to gloss over the things we really want to say. So why don't we step back? You know, instead of adding texture using tone or using lexicon, why don't we add texture by just being honest, you know, or write me a moment, like write me a moment. And I know Gary appreciates that, things like that, you know, like, yeah, those trees are pretty, but write me a moment, you know, what do you see when you actually look at those trees? So I think that's one thing I'm able to offer. And truth be told, in the process of editing this book and, you know, putting it all together, I've learned so much about myself, and I've learned so much about the South that even I didn't know. And so it was, if anything, it wasn't so much about teaching, it was really so much about learning, and but without taking, you know. That's definitely something I always try to do. I say, learn but don't snatch. So yeah, I hope that answers it.
No, I think that was really good. So Anderson has another great question, but since Gary is the only one that physically has a copy of the book, I don't know if we're going to be able to answer this one, because she asks if when you all read the other essays from people who from different backgrounds, did you still find yourself in those essays from the experience they had that were similar to yours? You know, I know we all had a PDF on the computer. I don't know if I don't know if Aruni, you got to read any of it. I don't know, Gary, if you got to read any of the other essays and saw similarities of your experiences there.
I did. I read Gary and Cinelle's essays. Cinelle's introduction, and I think it made me feel like, oh my God, there are parallels, there are echoes that I can relate to. I haven't had anybody kill me in my imagination in a poem, in a short story, but but similar kind of situations have happened. You see some nasty comments about my ability to speak English in the evaluations. That I'm not a native speaker, and I joke Americans are not native speakers of English as well. So I've taught in America before as also, so I could relate to a lot of what Gary was saying, and his experience of being new here and all of that. So I felt that I have a community. I felt that there are other people who have experienced this, and there are other people like who are empathetic to this experience, irrespective of their backgrounds. That made me feel really good, and I'm really looking forward to hold the book, Instagram it, and yes, Gary, you have it all. I'm very jealous. Yes, I'm really looking forward to read all the essays and definitely do a lot of Instagramming. Yeah.
I can understand that. There's a Mac, there's a iPad, there's another iPad in front of me, and it's like I desperately want that physical copy of the book. Actually, after I did my introduction and I went off camera, I ran out to the mailbox just on the off chance, but it's still not here, unfortunately. Well, if anyone has any parting thoughts before we leave, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank you all, to remind everyone that's watching at home this evening, Allie put the link for Hub City Press. Go ahead and order your copy and get those on the way to your mailboxes. If you're not ordering from Hub City, but want to do local pickup, so many of our independent bookstores here in Decatur and Atlanta are doing pop-up shops. They're doing grab and go bags where you can call ahead and pick the books up. They've been doing a wonderful job throughout this pandemic with that, mailing books to you all. So do support our independent businesses, do support our Black-owned businesses, because they're still in need of our help as well. So Cinelle, Aruni, Gary, anything before I release you from your author duties this evening to go and do other fun things?
Just a big thank you to Joe for moderating, Ali for organizing, Cinelle for all the labor, editorial labor, as I like to say, and editorial labors are invisible usually. So it is really wonderful. What a beautiful thing. And Gary, so lovely to meet you like this.
Likewise, Aruni. And yeah, just I dittoed everything Aruni said. I probably shouldn't just repeat it all, but and especially Cinelle, I know it's probably like wrangling a bunch of cats trying to get all these writers and poets together. So thank you all, Joe, Cinelle, Allie, for getting us together.
Thank you, everyone. I'm so thankful to everybody who contributed, obviously, and to Joe and Allie, and also to everyone who's here tonight. I know that we're probably just going from one Zoom to the other. I almost, punched in the wrong Zoom code because there's so many. And then I realized, wait, that's for my daughter's class. But I'm glad that we're able to do this. I'm glad that we have the technology to do this. And I'm glad that we're able to connect and hold each other up in this way. And just celebrate literature. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Cinelle. And folks, also, I know there are several other events planned for this book happening in October and November with other contributors. So follow Hub City Press and you can see where those events are taking place on Zoom or on Crowdcast. That way you can meet the other contributors and give yourself a rounded experience of the entire book. Thank you so much to Anderson and the South Carolina Center for the Book, Read South Carolina. And of course, once again, Hub City Press, they are the purveyors of all sorts of fine literature that you see on our shelves this evening. So also support a local publisher here in the South. Thank you all so much for coming and allowing us to be in your homes with you. Hopefully very, very soon, we'll all be back together in libraries and bookstores, doing the very thing that we used to do, and signing the books as well before you leave. Thank you all so very, very much for coming this evening. Stay safe and have a wonderful evening.
See ya. Thanks.